And today, let us continue our trend of scientific inaccuracies with Jurassic Park 3. Now, I'll be up front, for a long time I actually did not like this movie very much for a few reasons, as I think it's definitely the weakest of the original trilogy, but I gotta be honest, I have softened on it over the years. It's really still a very fun movie. It's not as good as the original or Lost World, sure, but what does that even say? Like, yeah, you're not as good as one of the greatest cinematic masterpieces of all time. Like, yeah, oh no. I mean, A Lost World maybe not be on that level, but still, like, I think JP3 is still worth watching. It's not offensively bad or anything. It's decent for what it is. There are some things I don't like, some things that could have been better, but I enjoy it. So, yeah. What I will say, though, is that it is full of more inaccuracies! Hooray! And the same rules apply as in The Lost World. Basically, if I've already talked about a species that has appeared in the series before, I probably won't bring it up in the list, because the same things will apply that I've already stated, so there's no point in repeating myself. So we're going to focus on new species that were introduced in this film. There are going to be exceptions. I will tell you there's at least one exception on this list, as there was last time as well. But for the most part, we won't be doing repeat entries. I do want to mention, though, that the raptors have evolved a bit in terms of their portrayal, and I think it's worth mentioning. There's a couple things about JP3 that should be brought up when it comes to the raptors. Mainly that they start calling them just raptors. If memory serves correctly, I don't believe anyone, not Dr. Grant, not Billy, not a single person, ever says the word velociraptor in this whole film. They just say raptors. Also, the raptor tribe in this movie was given new color morphs that are not only gender dimorphic, but also the males were given proto-feathering, which is an interesting touch. I believe the intent, in both the writing as well as the portrayal, was to try to lean towards a bit more accuracy without outright defying the canon established in the film universe, which is rather clever. If they just call them raptors, it could imply that they are now acknowledging that these cannot be velociraptors due to their size. They would likely be something like Utah raptor, as I've repeatedly said, or even Dakota raptor, or really, there's a lot of options when it comes to these things, but we've already gone over that. But I think this, plus the proto-feathering, is something that should be acknowledged, as it was a nice thing for the filmmakers to think about. Outside of that, though, let's continue with the official list. Pteranodon. Now, hold on, I just said we're not doing repeats, I know, but I also just said that we are gonna have some exceptions, and this is the one exception on this particular list. Because the Pteranodon only appeared briefly in The Lost World, and although there were a lot of problems there, somehow, and I still don't fully understand how, their portrayal in Jurassic Park 3 is actually less accurate. They actually made them worse in this regard. Now, the scene they're in is really awesome from a cinematic perspective, but boy, howdy do these animals, they're just not pteranodons. It's yo. Now, the one benefit that this portrayal has is they gave them the quadrupedal gait that all pterosaurs would have had, so they walk more accurately, but outside of that, they're pretty much all wrong. For one thing, they have teeth. Pteranodon didn't have any teeth. Why is this so hard to understand? I already went over this with the Gallimimuses. Why did they keep putting teeth on animals that didn't have them? Why would you do that? Why would you ever do that? That's literally more work from both a practical effects and a CGI perspective. Just don't have the teeth there. That's all you had to do. What, do you think they'd be less scary without the teeth? I assure you, the giant flying reptiles with pointed beaks are pretty intimidating even without teeth, okay? You didn't need to put them there. Their feet are also wrong again, as these pteranodons can indeed grasp large items of food, like people. Pteranodons couldn't do that. That was not the way their feet were, and it's arguable if they would even be able to fly carrying something so heavy. In fact, I can guarantee they wouldn't be, because these pteranodons are way too big. Like, way too big for Pteranodon. That's arguably the most glaring issue with them. These animals in the film have at least a 32-foot wingspan, which is insane. That's nearly the size of Quetzalcoatlus far and away too large for a pteranodon. A great scene, yeah, but full of ridiculous inaccuracies. And I'm still not over the tooth thing. I could get over the size, because I know they're clones. People have brought that up. These are clones. They have some differences. I understand that. But the teeth! Just don't put the teeth there! That's all you had to do! Pteranodon loosely translates to toothless wing! How do you miss that? Ankylosaurs. These animals only appear in the film briefly, but they are a really nice introduction, as ankylosaurs are a pretty popular type of dinosaur. I mean, they were basically walking tanks, heavily armored. So, in fact, among dinosaurs, they were probably the most heavily armored. That was their whole thing. But, naturally, Jurassic Park 3 gets a few things wrong about them. For one thing, they have sharp spikes coming out of their body instead of osteoderms. Their tail club is the wrong shape, and the facial horns are broader. Additionally, later in the series it is shown that they were capable of galloping away from a threat, only using their armor and club as a last resort. But this, no, probably not. They evolved that level of armor for a reason. They likely probably couldn't even run at all, possibly trotting at a decent pace, but definitely not run. And while in some scenes, particularly in Jurassic Park 3, they're holding their tail clubs properly, the Jurassic World variation tends to droop their tails a lot, which is not how they would have held them. They would have been held up. Not the worst I've seen, but definitely not very accurate. Still, I'll give them a C-, because, I mean, you can look at them and say that's an Ankylosaurus. Like, they're not nearly unrecognizable like the Pteranodon, you know? Spinosaurus aegypticus, whose species name I can use because Dr. Grant uses it in the movie to identify this new animal that they didn't expect to even find on Isla Sorna. Now, in the film canon, there is an explanation for this given later in the series, as indeed Spinosaurus was not one of the original dinosaurs cloned by InGen. But that's dealing with the film canon. We're here for scientific accuracy, and I put Spinosaurus in the very middle of this list because, frankly, I don't know where to put it. Because in terms of figuring out the scientific accuracy of Spinosaurus, have you asked a paleontologist lately what Spinosaurus looked like? Do you have any idea how many different iterations of that animal there have been? I did an entire standalone video about this problem. It is not at all unlikely for me to make this video, tell you all the things wrong with the Spinosaurus in Jurassic Park 3, only for, in a few years' time, everything I say to be completely overwritten by new discoveries. Because Spinosaurus is the shapeshifter of the paleontological world. It has changed forms more times than I care to count. From being in the old school tripod stance with the wrong skull, to being on all fours, to being in a more proper theropod layout, to being on all fours again, to being a big duck. Like, I don't know what to tell you about this because, man. But I'm going to point out the likely well-understood inaccuracies with this portrayal. For one thing, this Spinosaur, while there is a scene where it is in the water, a lot of its time seems to be spent on land, which is not very accurate. It would have been the other way around. They could go on land, sure, but they would have spent most of their time in the water. They had pronated wrists, which is wrong, but that's like every theropod in this entire series, so whatever. The sail is a bit too short, and the skull isn't quite right. This Spinosaurus has a slightly broader skull, not as narrow as the original, with 2 head crests on each side of its snout, rather than just 1 crest in the middle. In fact, it looks a lot more like Baryonyx than Spinosaurus. But outside of these issues, it is fairly accurate to the 1990s design of the animal based on what paleontologists thought. There are more issues with a more modern interpretation, like the fact that they think it might have had a paddle-like tail. This animal obviously doesn't have that. And in terms of it beating a T-Rex, yes, for one thing, they never would have met. They lived in completely different parts of the world, but even if they did get into a situation where they were to fight, the Rex was way bulkier than a Spinosaur. Maybe not quite as large in terms of length, but the Rex was very physically strong. Honestly, the fight should have been over as soon as this T-Rex bit down on the Spinosaur's neck, which happens pretty much immediately. Like, many people point out that the fight was too short, and from a cinematic point of view, they're probably right, but from a paleontological point of view, it was too long. The Rex won, like, immediately. But this Spinosaur's behavior is all over the place. This animal is angry, furious, all the time, straight up stalking the main characters. It is a fiercely territorial animal. And to be fair, in terms of behavior, that's supposition. We can only kind of guess as to what the original Spinosaur would have been like. But I can't imagine they'd be this angry, especially over prey that was very small. Like, I understand it may be getting mad about the plane hitting it and investigating after that, but past that point, I don't know whether it would have cared that much. But in any event, yeah, the Spinosaurus is all over the place. Although, fun fact though, this may be the first officially bred male dinosaur in the series. You probably know that all the dinosaurs were originally bred as females to prevent them from breeding, but because of frog DNA they could switch genders. Well, the Spinosaur was canonically bred as a male for some reason. I don't know whether the reason has ever been given, but yes, this is a boy. An angry, somewhat inaccurate, but who knows anymore, boy. Ceratosaurus. This was a nice dinosaur to see in the movie, even though its scene was, again, very brief. Also, not a dinosaur that was originally cloned by InGen. It was cloned alongside Spinosaurus later. And if you don't remember, it's the theropod that shows up when our main characters are digging through the Spinosaur's poop. And then it smells them. And decides, yeah, no. Which is fair. That's totally understandable. In terms of accuracy, it's okay. Like a B-, but there are some issues here. This animal has small horns over its eyes, which is actually a lot closer to the juvenile ceratosaurs, not the adults. Which is a problem because this animal is way too big. The typical height of the actual Ceratosaurus would be about 2 meters, with a length of 7 meters. But this animal is 3 meters tall, with a length of 9.2 meters, so quite a bit bigger. The horn is also not quite right. It may look cooler, as it's longer and more pointed, kind of like Triceratops, but the original Ceratosaur would have had a more rounded, bump-like horn. Outside of these problems, though, it's a serviceable rendition of the animal. Not super wrong. Oh yeah, it has pronated wrists. I don't know why you had to ask that. It's a theropod in Jurassic Park. Of course it had the pronated wrists. You already knew that was a problem. Come on. Corythosaurus. Or sometimes Corythosaurus. Depends who you ask, I guess. I believe it's pronounced Corythosaurus. These were hadrosaurs, with a little dome-like crest on their heads. Actually, yet another animal that was cloned in secret after the first 2 movies. Actually, Ankylosaurus was too. All 4 of the new dinosaurs in this movie weren't on the original list, go figure. But anyway, the rendition of Corythosaurus in the movie is hard to judge because it doesn't get much screen time, and it's usually seen running, and there's a lot of motion blur. It's hard to see it. But, based on what we can glean, they are too small, being 7 meters in length instead of 9 meters, but you could argue that they're juveniles on screen, so you know, that's kind of a issue in my mind, but their biggest problem has to do with how they walk. Just like Parasaurolophus, for some reason, they keep making it so the hadrosaurs like running on their hind legs and standing on them all the time, which is wrong. They would have spent most of their lives on all fours, and perhaps they could rear if they needed to. That's not an unreasonable possibility, but they definitely wouldn't have walked around like that or run, which they do in the film. But outside of that, it's not a bad rendition of Corythosaurus, so hey, whatever. And with that, special thank you. That's my Apex Predators, Arthur Roy, Metal for Life Guy, and Dr. Racer78. Till next time, this is Darkness, and a bid you all a fun farewell.